When billionaire heir Ethan Blackwell decided to disguise himself as a humble pizza delivery driver to meet Olivia's parents, he thought it would be an innocent way to experience life outside his gilded cage. But as he stepped into their modest home, balancing a stack of steaming pizzas, the reality of his lie began to unravel. Judgmental glances and probing questions revealed the gap between his two lives. And just as his love story seemed to find footing, the truth loomed dangerously close to exposure. Would love survive betrayal? But before we dive deeper into the twists of this story, let me know where you're watching this from in the comments below. If you're intrigued, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter. The New York City skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Blackwell's penthouse. The view, breathtaking as ever, reflected the city's ceaseless energy, neon lights flickering like electric veins, streets teeming with life below, yet inside the sleek modern apartment, silence reigned. Ethan stood with a glass of whiskey in hand, the amber liquid catching the glow of the city lights. The room around him was pristine, almost sterile, a designer couch here, a modern art piece there, but nothing truly personal. It was the picture of success, but also of solitude. At 35, Ethan was the youngest executive in the Blackwell Group, a global real estate empire built brick by his father, Richard Blackwell. Ethan had it all: wealth, power, and influence. Yet, he felt like a stranger in his own life. Nights like these, when the city's M faded into the background, he couldn't escape the gnawing emptiness. He let out a slow breath, the weight of expectation pressing heavy on his shoulders. His father's words from years ago played on a loop in his mind. "You're a Blackwell, Ethan. Weakness isn't in our DNA. This empire rests on your shoulders." His jaw clenched at the memory. Weakness. That's all Richard ever saw in him. No matter the deals closed, the accolades won, it was never enough. Every try was a failure. Richard sat on the edge of the bed and worked hard to keep the worry from rippling outward like a sea. The intercom buzzed, jolting Ethan from his thoughts. "Mr. Blackwell," his assistant's voice filtered through, brisk and efficient. "Your father wants you in the office. There's a meeting about the Battery Park acquisition." Ethan swirled the whiskey in his glass before setting it down with a soft clink. His lips curled into a mirthless smile. "Another day. Another soulless deal," he muttered under his breath. The Battery Park acquisition was a crown jewel in the company's portfolio, another step in the relentless expansion Richard Blackwell had masterminded. It wasn't that Ethan lacked the skill or ambition for the job, it was that every deal felt like another brick in the wall of his own confinement. He loosened the tie around his neck and glanced at his reflection in the window. The man staring back looked every inch the billionaire heir. Sharp suit, carefully combed dark hair, a face hardened by years of corporate battles. But there was something missing, something even he couldn't name. As the city sparkled below, Ethan whispered to himself, "Is this it? Is this all there is?" For years he had played the part of the dutiful son, the competent executive, the man his father demanded him to be. But tonight, staring out at the city, Ethan felt the cracks in his carefully constructed facade beginning to spread. Something had to change. He just didn't know what or how. The cobblestone streets of Greenwich Village felt like a world apart from the towering skyscrapers and glass-walled offices of Ethan's daily life. Here, the air was softer, tinged with the aroma of fresh bread and coffee. Boutiques and bakeries lined the street, their colorful storefronts inviting in a way Ethan couldn't quite ignore. He wasn't sure what had drawn him here today, perhaps a subconscious need to escape, if only for a moment. As he strolled past, the scent of warm, freshly baked bread caught his attention. His gaze landed on a quaint little bakery with a golden sign that read, "The Golden Loaf." For reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan pushed the door open, the bell above it jingling softly. The warmth of the bakery enveloped him immediately, a stark contrast to the cool sterility of his penthouse. Wooden shelves brimmed with crusty loaves and pastries dusted with powdered sugar. It felt real, alive. Behind the counter, a woman was working, her hands deftly kneading dough. Her honey-colored eyes sparkled under the soft light, and a smudge of flour crossed her cheek like an unintentional brushstroke on a masterpiece. She was humming a tune, unaware of her effortless charm. She looked up as Ethan approached, flashing him a bright smile. "Good afternoon. What can I get for you?" For a moment, Ethan was struck silent. He wasn't used to this kind of warmth, genuine and unguarded. He cleared his throat, awkwardly scanning the array of bread. What do you recommend?" Her laughter was light and musical. "First time here, huh? Okay, let's see. If you're feeling adventurous, try the walnut and raisin bread. But if you're more of a classic guy, the country loaf is always a winner." Ethan hesitated, unsure why such a simple decision felt monumental. "Both," he said finally. "I'll take both." As she wrapped the loaves, their hands brushed briefly when he handed her the cash. It was the smallest of touches, but it sent a jolt through him, an inexplicable spark that lingered even as she continued to move with practiced ease. "Thanks for stopping by," she said, sliding the bread into a bag. "I'm Olivia, by the way. Haven't seen you around here before." Her gaze was curious but friendly. Ethan's instinctive defenses kicked in. "Michael," he blurted, the name falling from his lips before he could stop it. I just moved here." "Nice to meet you, Michael," she replied, her smile widening. "Hope to see you again. Enjoy the bread." Ethan managed a nod before stepping out into the street, the bag warm in his hands. The air felt different now, lighter, charged. As he walked away, he found himself replaying the encounter in his mind. Her laugh, the flour on her cheek, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about bread. It wasn't just her charm that lingered. It was the way she made him feel. For the first time in years, the hollow emptiness that clung to him like a shadow had lifted, if only slightly. Ethan caught himself smiling, a rare and fleeting moment of something resembling joy. And as he continued down the street, he couldn't shake a single thought. "I want to see her again." The penthouse was cloaked in dim light, the glow from the city outside casting fractured patterns against the pristine glass walls. Ethan sat on the sleek leather couch, his shirt collar loosened, the remnants of a long day's work visible in the faint lines of exhaustion etched into his face. The half-finished glass of whiskey rested on the table beside him, untouched for hours. The television murmured in the background, its low hum a poor substitute for actual company. Ethan wasn't paying attention until the flashing colors of a commercial caught his eye. A pizza delivery ad filled the screen, bright, lively, unpolished. College kids grinned as they juggled pizza boxes, laughter erupting over botched deliveries and late-night adventures. For reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan leaned forward, staring at the ad as if it were revealing a secret meant only for him. The simplicity of it all struck a chord. No boardrooms, no expectations, no endless struggle to live up to his father's shadow. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives. And then, like a spark igniting dry kindling, an idea began to form. At first, it seemed absurd, almost laughable, but as he turned it over in his mind, it became more than a whim. It became a plan. Finally, it started. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window where the city stretched out beneath him, vibrant and alive. The idea was wild, it was risky, and it was exhilarating. "If I want to know her," Ethan murmured, his voice low and resolute, "really know her, I have to step out of my world." It was impossible to imagine connecting with Olivia as Ethan Blackwell, the billionaire heir to a real estate empire. She would never see past the suit, the reputation, the walls he had built around himself. But as someone else, someone simpler, unburdened by his name. He could step into her world. The thought both terrified and thrilled him. He had spent his entire life playing by the rules of a game his father had designed, and now he was ready to break them. For the first time, he wanted something for himself, something that couldn't be measured in dollars or stock options. Ethan grabbed his phone and began searching. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for: a small pizza shop not far from the Golden Loaf, hiring part-time delivery drivers. He laughed softly to himself, a mix of disbelief and excitement. Was this crazy? Absolutely, but it was also the most alive he had felt in years. With a newfound determination, Ethan leaned against the window, gazing out at the city that had always felt more like a cage than a home. "Let's see how this plays out," he whispered, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. For once, he wasn't planning his next corporate move. He was planning something far more dangerous, a leap into the unknown. The small, boxy mirror in the back of the pizza shop reflected a sight Ethan barely recognized. Dressed in a red polo shirt with the pizzeria's logo stitched over the chest and a matching cap, he looked ordinary. It was an image completely at odds with the man who usually sported tailored suits and custom Italian shoes. Ethan adjusted the cap nervously, smoothing his hair beneath it. The uniform felt foreign, awkward on his frame, but it was a necessary disguise. Just for one night, he murmured to himself, though deep down, he wasn't sure if he believed it. Outside, the city buzzed, as it always did, but this time, Ethan was part of it, in a way he had never been before. He strapped a stack of insulated pizza bags onto his scooter and pulled up the delivery route on his phone. The plan was simple: blend in, stay inconspicuous, and maybe, just maybe, cross paths with Olivia again. As he navigated the streets, the thrill of anonymity coursed through him. Gone were the judgmental stares of corporate elites or the suffocating expectations of his father. For the first time, Ethan felt like he was writing his own script, free from the constraints of his old life. The final delivery on his route brought him to Greenwich Village. The cobblestone streets were familiar now, a sharp contrast to the cold sterility of skyscrapers and boardrooms. As he rounded the corner near the Golden Loaf, his heart skipped. There she was, Olivia, locking up the bakery for the night, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, a light coat draped over her shoulders. She looked as effortlessly radiant as she had the day he met her. Ethan hesitated, gripping the handles of his scooter. This wasn't part of the plan. Not tonight, not like this. But the universe, it seemed, had other ideas. "Pizza delivery," he called out, his voice light and casual, though his heart pounded in his chest. Olivia jumped slightly at the unexpected sound, then turned, her expression shifting from surprise to recognition. "Michael," she asked, her honey-colored eyes narrowing in amusement. "You deliver pizzas?" Her head hummed behind her, focusing on the figure standing near her. For a split second, Ethan froze. He scrambled for an excuse, his mind racing faster than it had in any boardroom negotiation. "Yeah," he said, forcing a sheepish grin. "Just, extra work to get by." Her laughter bubbled up, warm and genuine. "You're full of surprises, Michael," she said, tilting her head as if trying to reconcile this version of him with the one she'd met in the bakery. Ethan chuckled nervously, adjusting the strap of his pizza bag. Yeah, well, life keeps you on your toes, right? Olivia stepped closer, her curiosity evident. Need a hand with that? She offered, gesturing to the stack of pizza boxes. Ethan shook his head quickly. No, I've got it under control, he said, trying to sound confident. But then, in a moment of impulsive courage, he added, Actually, can I give you a ride home? It's on my way. Connor spat dirt off his hands in the direction of the jungle, and then Ethan saw the tiny thin lines of depression preceding the rhythm. Olivia paused, surprised by the offer. Her eyes searched his face for a moment, then she smiled. Sure, why not? The two of them hopped onto the scooter, Olivia's laughter ringing out as she clung to him for balance. Ethan couldn't help but grin, the simple joy of the moment overpowering his usual guardedness. As the scooter rocketed sideways, they sat looking at each other in the waist-high suit's footprint. As they weaved through the quiet streets, Olivia pointed out landmarks and shared bits of her life, her love for baking, her dreams for the bakery, and the occasional frustration of working late hours. Ethan listened intently, soaking in every detail, every laugh. For the first time in years, he felt like more than just the heir to an empire. He felt like a man who was finally starting to live. As they reached her apartment, Olivia hopped off the scooter, turning to face him with a smile. Thanks for the ride, Michael. You're officially the most interesting pizza delivery guy I've ever met. Ethan laughed, scratching the back of his neck. Glad I could help, he said, watching as she disappeared into the building. As he rode off into the night, the thrill of the double life settled into his chest. He knew it couldn't last forever, but for now, he was content to let it unfold, one moment at a time. The tension in the air was palpable as Ethan stepped into his father's office at the Blackwell Group. The room exuded power. Dark mahogany furniture, floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with leather-bound books, and framed certificates that screamed success. At the center of it all sat Richard Blackwell, his imposing presence filling the space as he reviewed a document with an expression of growing frustration. When Ethan entered, Richard didn't look up. Instead, he slapped a thick file onto the desk with a resounding thud. "What's this about missing meetings?" Richard demanded, his voice sharp. "You're distracted, Ethan. Is there something I should know?" Ethan took a slow breath, his jaw tightening. "I've been exploring new investments," he said evenly, stepping closer to the desk. "New investments?" Richard repeated, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Stop playing games. This empire doesn't run on whims. Every move you make reflects on this family, on me. So, I'll ask you again. What's going on?" Ethan held his father's gaze, the air between them heavy with unspoken tension. "Not everything has to be about the empire," he said finally, his voice steady but resolute. Richard leaned back in his chair, a scowl deepening the lines on his face. "Don't be naive. This is about legacy, about maintaining what we've built. You don't get the luxury of distraction." Ethan wanted to argue, to push back against the weight of expectation that had been crushing him for years, but he bit his tongue. "I'll handle it," he said tersely, turning on his heel and leaving before the conversation could spiral further. Ethan followed him out the door, his mind racing. Later that night, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The warm, inviting glow of the golden loaf was a welcome refuge from the cold sterility of his father's office. Ethan sat at a small table in the corner, his red delivery uniform a stark contrast to the polished suits he usually wore. Olivia approached him with a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a plate of cake in the other. "Long night?" she asked, setting the plate down in front of him. Ethan smiled, the tension from earlier starting to melt away. "You could say that." But regardless, she sat across from him, resting her elbows on the table as she studied him. "You're different, Michael. she said softly, her voice laced with curiosity. "You're real. Most people I meet are all about appearances, but you don't seem like that." Her words struck a chord, and Ethan felt a pang of guilt twist in his chest. He wasn't real. Not entirely. The name she knew wasn't his, and the life she thought he lived was only half the truth. But Olivia's gaze was steady, her expression open and sincere. "I mean it," she continued. "You're different, in a good way. You make people feel seen. That's rare." The woman raised her chalk to her terrestrial eyes. Then her eyes drifted to Olivia. Ethan looked down at the coffee, stirring it absently. "And you're amazing," he said, his voice tinged with both admiration and guilt. "You make me want to be better." For a moment, there was silence between them, comfortable and charged at the same time. Olivia smiled, her cheeks tinged with a faint blush. "Well, you're doing a pretty good job so far," she said lightly. Ethan chuckled, though the weight of his double life pressed heavier than ever. Here, in this cozy bakery with Olivia, he felt like the person he wanted to be, but he couldn't shake the looming shadow of the other world he inhabited, the world his father controlled, the world that demanded perfection and left no room for vulnerability. As Olivia rose to clean up for the night, Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching her move with an effortless grace. He wanted so badly to hold on to this part of his life, to keep this connection alive. But the deeper he went, the harder it would be to reconcile the two worlds he was straddling. For now, though, he let himself savor the warmth of the moment, knowing full well that the storm brewing between his two identities was only just beginning. Ethan pulled up to Olivia's family home, a modest house nestled on a quiet street lined with trees. It was a world apart from the penthouse suites and luxury estates he was accustomed to. The porch light flickered faintly, and the faint hum of a nearby television spilled out through an open window. It was unassuming, yet it felt alive in a way his own world never did. Olivia stood on the porch, waving him over with her usual radiant smile. "Come on, Michael," she called, her voice warm and inviting. "They're dying to meet you." As he climbed the few steps to the door, Ethan's nerves began to bubble beneath his carefully constructed facade. Meeting someone's parents was always a pivotal moment, but in his case, it felt like walking a tightrope without a safety net. The lie that had begun as a harmless way to connect with Olivia now felt like a ticking bomb in his chest. The door creaked open, revealing Robert and Sarah Taylor, Olivia's parents. Robert, a man with a weathered face and kind but scrutinizing eyes, extended a firm handshake. "Michael, is it? Nice to meet you," he said, his tone cordial but measured. Sarah stood beside him, her smile polite but guarded. "Welcome," she added, gesturing for Ethan to step inside. The living room was small but cozy, filled with family photos and mismatched furniture. The air smelled faintly of baked apples, a comforting contrast to the sterile scent of his father's office. As they settled into the living room, Olivia perched on the armrest of Ethan's chair, her presence a reassuring anchor. Small talk flowed at first, how they'd met, the bakery, and Olivia's plans for expansion. But then Robert leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and the conversation took a sharper turn. "So, Michael," Robert began, his tone casual but probing, "what do you do for a living?" The question hit Ethan like a freight train, though he had anticipated it. He felt Olivia glance at him, her expression expectant. Clearing his throat, he answered, "I deliver pizzas." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable, while Sarah's smile faltered, her eyes darting toward Olivia. "Well," Sarah said, her voice strained with forced cheer, "Olivia deserves the best, you know." The words, innocuous on the surface, cut deeper than Ethan had expected. He forced a smile, nodding as if unaffected, but inside a mix of anger and shame churned. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he wasn't just some guy scraping by. But how could he do that without revealing the truth? Robert's gaze lingered on Ethan, his skepticism clear. "It's good, honest work," he said finally, though his tone lacked conviction. Olivia, sensing the tension, interjected. "Dad, Michael's great. He's hardworking and kind. That's what matters, right?" Her voice was steady, but Ethan could feel her hand brush his lightly, a silent reassurance. Dinner proceeded with strained politeness, but Ethan couldn't shake the heaviness of Robert's unspoken doubts and Sarah's veiled disapproval. He wasn't used to feeling judged or underestimated. In his world, his name alone commanded respect. But here, stripped of his status, he was just a man sitting at a table, trying to prove his worth. When the evening ended and Olivia walked him to the door, Ethan felt the weight of the night settle on his shoulders. She squeezed his hand, her smile soft and genuine. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It means a lot to me." Ethan hesitated, the words caught in his throat. He wanted to tell her the truth, about who he really was, about the lies he'd told to be close to her. But the thought of losing her stopped him. As he stepped off the porch and onto the quiet street, he made a silent resolution. He couldn't keep living this lie. Olivia deserved the truth, even if it cost him the fragile connection they had built. The thought of her smile fading, of her looking at him with disappointment, sent a chill through him. But he knew the longer he waited, the worse it would be. The web he had spun was tightening, and soon it would be impossible to escape. "I am getting tired, trying to sleep." It was a quiet evening at the Golden Loaf. The bakery had just closed for the night, the lingering scent of cinnamon and freshly baked bread still hanging in the air. Olivia hummed softly as she wiped down the counter, a small smile playing on her lips. Her mind wandered to Michael, or rather, the man she thought she knew. He had become a constant in her life, his kindness and charm a welcome reprieve from her usual routines. As she moved to grab a rag from the shelf, her gaze caught on something unusual sitting on the counter. A business card, sleek and professional, embossed with bold lettering. Ethan Blackwell, CEO, Blackwell Group. Her heart stopped. For a moment, she stared at the card, her mind racing to piece together the impossible. Ethan Blackwell? The name was familiar. Too familiar. News articles, business headlines, whispers of corporate empires. This couldn't be her Michael. Could it? Anger began to bubble beneath her shock, each unanswered question feeding the fire. Grabbing the card, she stormed out from behind the counter and headed toward the small table in the corner where Ethan Blackwell, was sitting. He had just finished his shift, his red delivery uniform wrinkled and slightly askew as he scrolled through his phone. "He's in Blackwell," Olivia spat, her voice sharp enough to cut through the quiet. Ethan looked up, his face paling as his gaze landed on the card clutched tightly in her hand. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. "You lied to me," Olivia continued, her voice rising with each syllable. "This whole time you've been pretending to be someone you're not. Michael, a pizza delivery guy? That's not who you are, is it?" "Olivia, please," Ethan began, standing from his seat. His tone was calm but edged with desperation. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" she snapped, waving the card in front of him. "That you've been lying to my face since the day we met? That every single thing I know about you is a complete fabrication?" Ethan stepped closer, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "It's not like that," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I didn't want you to see me as just another rich guy. I wanted you to see me as me. As me." Olivia let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "As you? Which version of you, Ethan? The CEO of a billion-dollar company? or the guy delivering pizzas to make ends meet, because right now I don't know which one is real." Ethan's chest tightened at her words. The look in her eyes, betrayal, hurt, disbelief, was almost too much to bear. "I didn't plan for this to happen," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "When I met you, I saw someone real, someone who didn't care about money or status. I wanted to be part of that world, even if it meant stepping out of mine." Olivia crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "So you lied. You made a choice to deceive me, Ethan. Do you know how humiliating this is? I introduced you to my family. I defended you when they doubted you, and all along you've been living a double life." Her words hit him like a freight train, each one sharper than the last. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find the right response. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. I didn't know how to tell you the truth without losing you." "And now," Olivia challenged, her voice trembling, "you think this makes it better? That telling me after I found out on my own fixes everything?" And the captain turned round to her, his face taking on a glimmer of solemn and sad intensity, the glow of his immortal words resembling to tears. Ethan's shoulders sagged, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. "I know I messed up," he admitted, "but everything I've said to you, everything I've felt, it's real. The person I am with you, that's who I want to be." For a moment, silence fell between them, the tension thick and suffocating. Olivia looked down at the card in her hand, her grip loosening slightly. "I don't know if I can believe you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You broke my trust, Ethan, and I don't know if you can fix that." Ethan's heart sank, but he nodded, knowing she had every right to feel this way. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said softly. "Just tell me how." Olivia didn't respond. Instead, she turned away, walking back toward the counter with slow, deliberate steps. Ethan watched her go, the distance between them feeling far greater than the few feet that separated them. As the door to the bakery closed behind him moments later, Ethan realized that the lie he had built to protect their connection might have shattered it beyond repair. The Blackwell Group headquarters loomed high above the bustling streets of Manhattan, its sleek glass facade a testament to the empire Richard Blackwell had built. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was as cold and sterile as the towering building itself. Ethan sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, his arms crossed as he faced his father. Richard stood near the head of the table, a man accustomed to command. His expression was grim, his jaw set with the same unyielding determination that had driven him to the top. Without a word, he tossed a folder onto the table, its contents spilling out. Photos of Ethan, clad in a red delivery uniform, helmet under one arm, standing outside a pizzeria. A thin, indiscernible form of grief-strickenness, staring the folder onto the table. A man who was once more in the dark. Ethan's stomach twisted as he glanced at the images. He hadn't thought his father would stoop to surveillance, but he should have known better. "Explain this," Richard demanded, his voice icy and controlled, though anger simmered beneath the surface. Ethan leaned back in his chair, forcing himself to appear calm. "What's there to explain?" he said. "You've clearly done your homework." Richard's fist slammed against the table, the sound reverberating through the room. "Don't play games with me, Ethan. This is childish, reckless, and completely beneath you. Do you have any idea how this looks? You, a Blackwell, running around delivering pizzas like some lowly what?" Ethan interrupted, his voice rising to meet his father's anger. "Human being? Someone trying to live a life that isn't dictated by your impossible standards?" Richard's glare hardened. "This isn't about standards. It's about responsibility. This company, this family, relies on you. Your little charade has jeopardized everything. Investors, board members, they've started asking questions. End it now, or I'll end it for you." Ethan pushed back his chair, standing to meet his father eye to eye. "You'll end it?" he said, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "That's your solution to everything, isn't it? Control, manipulate, destroy, anything that doesn't fit your perfect little narrative." Richard took a step closer, his towering presence meant to intimidate. "Don't mistake me, Ethan. You don't get to turn your back on this family. On me. You've been handed everything on a silver platter, and this is how you repay me? With rebellion and humiliation?" Ethan felt a surge of anger rise within him, years of suppressed frustration finally boiling over. "Handed everything," he repeated, his voice trembling with rage. "You think I wanted this life? The suits, the deals, the constant pressure to be just like you? I've spent my entire existence trying to meet your expectations. And for what? To feel empty, to lose myself." Richard's expression flickered for a moment, but he quickly masked it with his usual stern resolve. "You don't get to walk away, Ethan. This empire is your legacy." Ethan took a step back, shaking his head. "No, Dad, it's your legacy. I'm done living your life. It's time I lived mine." The room fell into a tense silence. Richard's face remained impassive, but his grip on the edge of the table betrayed the storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. "You'll regret this," Richard said finally, his voice low and sharp. "Mark my words, Ethan. Empires crumble from within." Ethan met his father's gaze, unflinching. "Maybe it's time for this one to crumble," he said, before turning and walking out of the boardroom. As the elevator doors closed behind him, Ethan felt a strange mix of fear and liberation. For the first time in his life, he had stood up to his father. Not just for himself, but for the chance at a life he could call his own. The air in the golden loaf felt heavy, oppressive, a far cry from the usual warmth that filled this space. Olivia sat at one of the small tables, a crumpled letter clutched in her trembling hands. The bold red words at the top of the page, "Final notice of foreclosure," stared back at her like a cruel taunt. Tears blurred her vision as she read the letter again, hoping for some mistake, some miscalculation. But the facts were clear. Unless she came up with an impossible sum of money, the bakery would be gone. She'd built this place from the ground up, pouring her heart into every detail, every loaf of bread, every welcoming smile. It wasn't just a business, it was her dream, her sanctuary. And now it was slipping away. Her phone sat on the table, its screen dark. For a long time she debated whether to make the call. Part of her still felt raw from her confrontation with Ethan. Or rather, Ethan Blackwell. The lies he had told were hard to forgive, but right now, she needed help. And deep down, she knew he was the only one who might be able to give it. With a shaky breath, Olivia picked up the phone and dialed his number, ready to concentrate all her energy on it. Ethan answered on the second ring. "Olivia." His voice was cautious, uncertain. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm losing the bakery. I don't know what to do." There was a pause on the other end, but it wasn't the silence of indifference. Ethan was listening, absorbing every word. The solitary tragedy. "What happened?" he asked gently. "It's Richard, isn't it?" Olivia continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I don't know how, but I know this has something to do with him. My landlord suddenly raised the rent and now they're threatening foreclosure. I can't—" Her voice broke and she took a shaky breath. "I can't lose this place, Ethan. It's everything I have." Ethan felt a surge of anger, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He had seen his father's ruthlessness countless times before, but hearing how it had directly hurt Olivia made his blood boil. "Hold on, Liv," he said, his tone firm and resolute. "We'll fix this. Together." "How?" Olivia asked. desperation creeping into her voice. "I don't have the money. Even if I sold everything I own, it wouldn't be enough." "Let me handle it," Ethan said. "I'll find a way." "But why would you help me?" she asked, her voice laced with doubt. "After everything that's happened, why do you care?" Ethan closed his eyes, his chest tightening. "Because I care about you, Olivia," he said softly. "I know I've made mistakes, big ones, but I'm not going to stand by and let you lose everything. You don't deserve this. Now, let's get out of here and find my daughter." There was silence on the line, but Ethan could hear Olivia's soft, uneven breathing. "Do you trust me?" he asked, his voice gentle but earnest. "I don't know," she admitted after a moment. "But I don't have anyone else to turn to." "That's enough for me," Ethan replied. "I'll call you as soon as I have a plan." As the call ended, Ethan stared out the window of his penthouse, the sprawling city below a blur of lights. He knew Richard's hand was behind this, and he also knew it wouldn't be easy to undo. But for Olivia, for the woman who had shown him a glimpse of the life he wanted, he was ready to fight. This wasn't just about saving a bakery. It was about proving to Olivia, and to himself, that he could be the man she deserved. The atmosphere in the Blackwell Group's boardroom was thick with tension. The members of the board, a collection of seasoned executives and corporate elites, sat in their usual places, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. At the head of the table, Richard Blackwell stood tall, his presence commanding the room as always. Ethan entered, his steps steady and purposeful, a folder tucked under his arm. The murmur of hushed conversation stopped as all eyes turned to him. He scanned the room, his gaze settling briefly on his father before moving to the table. "Thank you for making time today," Ethan began, his voice calm but firm. "I've called this meeting because there's an issue that needs addressing, a matter that goes beyond profit margins and quarterly reports." "If?" Richard's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "Get to the point, Ethan," he said coolly. Ethan opened the folder, spreading a series of documents across the table. "This," he said, gesturing to the papers, "is evidence of interference by the Blackwell Group in the affairs of a small bakery called the Golden Loaf. Specifically, an intentional manipulation of lease terms that led to an unjust rent hike, threatening foreclosure." The room fell silent. The board members exchanged uncertain glances, their unease growing with each passing second. Richard stepped forward, his expression dark. "And why should we care about some insignificant bakery?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. Ethan turned to face his father, his voice rising with conviction. "Because it's not just a bakery. It's someone's dream, someone's livelihood. And it's not the only example of how far this company has strayed from its values, or at least the values it should have." He paused, letting his words sink in. "For too long, this empire has been built on greed and ruthlessness, with no regard for the people it affects. I can't stand by and let that continue. This company should stand for more than profit. It should stand for integrity, for opportunity, for creating something that matters." A few murmurs rippled through the room, some of the board members nodding subtly. Ethan's voice softened but lost none of its intensity. "The Golden Loaf is more than just a bakery to me. It represents a chance to be better, to create a future that isn't defined by the mistakes of the past, and I won't let anyone destroy that. Not even my own father." "Oh," a smile curled the corners of his mouth. "I would, even my own father." Richard's face was a mask of fury, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You think this idealism will save you? This is a business, Ethan, not a charity. Empires aren't built on sentiment, they're built on power. And you're throwing it all away for what? Some fleeting notion of love? You're all alone as a fucking worm." Ethan stepped closer to Richard, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. "This empire isn't about money," he said firmly. "It's about people, and I won't let greed destroy what matters." The boardroom erupted into murmurs once more, but this time the tone was different. There was a shift, a sense that Ethan's words were resonating. One of the senior members, a woman with a sharp gaze and years of experience, raised her hand to call for order. "I propose we vote," she said. "Do we support Ethan's vision for the company, or do we continue on the current path?" Richard's lips thinned, but he didn't object. The vote began, each member casting their decision. When the results were tallied, the majority stood in favor of Ethan. The room broke into light applause, though the victory was bittersweet. Ethan looked at his father, who remained silent, his face unreadable. As the room began to empty, Richard finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "This isn't over, son," he said. "Remember, empires crumble from within." Ethan met his father's gaze, his expression resolute. "Maybe it's time to build something stronger," he replied. He turned to his dad, and father cursed. "Dear Lord, dear Lord," dear Lord cursed. As Richard turned and left the room, Ethan exhaled deeply. The battle was far from over, but for the first time he felt like he was on the right path, not just for the company, but for himself and for Olivia. However, he couldn't ignore the storm brewing on the horizon, knowing full well that the cost of change was far from paid, leaving him with a sense of foreboding. The soft glow of the late afternoon sun bathed Central Park in hues of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the mosaic-studded terrace where Ethan stood. The setting was serene, the gentle rustle of leaves blending with the distant laughter of children and the faint melodies of a street performer's violin. He adjusted his jacket nervously, his fingers brushing against the small velvet box in his pocket. Ethan had spent weeks planning this moment, each detail carefully chosen. Central Park had been Olivia's favorite spot since they started spending time together here, a rare place where the chaos of the city seemed to melt away. Today it would become the backdrop to a new chapter in their story. Olivia arrived just as the sun dipped closer to the horizon, her smile lighting up the path as she approached. She wore a simple dress, her hair cascading in soft waves, and she looked every bit as radiant as the first time he'd seen her behind the counter, behind the golden loaf. "You're mysterious today," she teased as she reached him, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "What's this all about?" I watched. Ethan smiled, the corners of his mouth tugging upward despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "I just thought it was a good day to take a walk," he said, gesturing toward the terrace. Together, they strolled along the path, their steps falling into an easy rhythm. As they reached the heart of the terrace, Olivia's eyes were drawn to the intricate mosaics beneath their feet. She paused, her gaze tracing the vibrant patterns. "I've always loved this spot," she murmured, her voice soft. "It's like every piece tells a story, and together they create something so beautiful." Ethan took a deep breath, his heart pounding as he turned to face her. "That's exactly why I brought you here," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions welling up inside him. Olivia looked up at him, her expression curious. "What do you mean?" Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet box, dropping to one knee as he opened it to reveal a delicate ring. The band was simple yet elegant, adorned with tiny stones arranged in a pattern reminiscent of the mosaics they stood upon. Since it was a testament to the inspiring nature of the mosaics, Ethan felt deeply in love. "Olivia," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "From the moment I met you, you've been the piece I didn't know was missing. You've shown me a world I never thought I could be part of, a world full of love, authenticity, and second chances. You've made me believe that even the broken pieces of our lives can come together to create something beautiful." Her hand flew to her mouth, tears already glistening in her eyes. He smiled, his own eyes damp. "Will you marry me and turn our mosaic into a masterpiece?" For a moment, Olivia was too overwhelmed to speak, her emotions catching in her throat. She nodded quickly, her voice trembling as she managed to say, "Yes, Ethan. Always." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, rising to pull her into his arms. The world around them seemed to fade, the noises of the park a distant hum as they held each other tightly. The mosaic beneath their feet shimmered in the golden light, a fitting symbol for the life they were about to build together. Imperfect, vibrant, and utterly unique. As they walked hand in hand through the park, Olivia glanced at him, her smile soft. "You know," she said playfully, "this was worth all the mystery." Ethan chuckled, squeezing her hand. "Just wait," he said. "Our masterpiece is only just beginning." The conference room at the Blackwell Group headquarters buzzed with tension. Ethan stood at the head of the table, addressing the board about a critical vote for the foundation he had worked tirelessly to establish. A new branch of the Blackwell legacy, focused on supporting small businesses and local communities. His vision had gained momentum, but opposition, spearheaded by his father, threatened to derail everything. "Every one of you come with an opposition," spearheaded by his father, threatened to derail everything. Just as Ethan finished presenting his final argument, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and felt his blood run cold. Hospital. Olivia. Urgent. Simon, standing in the doorway with them, looked up and down the hallway before turning to look at his daughter. Time seemed to freeze as panic surged through him. Olivia was in her third trimester and the pregnancy had been difficult from the start. The doctors had warned them about potential complications, but Ethan had clung to hope that everything would be fine. Now, that hope felt fragile, slipping through his fingers. The room fell silent as Ethan picked up his phone, his hand shaking. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tight. "I have to go." Silva nodded to appreciate. Richard's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Ethan, this vote determines the future of the company. You can't just walk out." Ethan turned to face his father, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. "My wife and child are in danger," he said. "If you think I'm staying here, you don't know me at all. In my office, I hate my life. In my private life," Reason said, clearly taking dissent, "I have become something else, and in my personal life." Without waiting for a response, he strode out of the room, leaving the stunned board members in his wake. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and hurried voices. Ethan rushed through the halls, his heart pounding as he reached the maternity ward. A nurse met him at the door, her expression grave. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, "your wife is stable, but we're monitoring her closely. The baby's heart rate is dropping. The doctors are preparing for an emergency procedure." Ethan felt his knees weaken, but he forced himself to stay upright. "Can I see her?" he asked. The nurse nodded, leading him into the room where Olivia lay pale and exhausted, her eyes fluttering open as he approached. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice weak but relieved. He took her hand, his own trembling as he held on to her. "I'm here," he said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." The doctor entered, his expression calm but serious. "Mr. Blackwell, we need to act quickly. There are risks to both mother and child, but we'll do everything we can." Ethan's voice broke as he said, "Save them. Whatever it takes." Meanwhile, back at Blackwell Group, Richard seized the opportunity to strike. With Ethan absent, he presented a motion to dismantle the foundation's funding, redirecting resources to a more profitable venture. The board hesitated, torn between loyalty to Richard and their growing belief in Ethan's vision. Unaware of his father's actions, Ethan remained at Olivia's side as the minutes dragged on like hours. Finally, a nurse emerged, her face breaking into a reassuring smile. "Your wife and daughter are both safe," she said. "The surgery was a success." Relief washed over Ethan like a tidal wave. He was led to the nursery where he saw his newborn daughter for the first time, a tiny, perfect life wrapped in a pink blanket. He felt tears sting his eyes as he whispered, "Welcome to the world, Hope." The next day, Ethan returned to Blackwell Group, exhaustion etched into his face, but determination burning in his eyes. Word of Richard's betrayal had reached him, and he stormed into his father's office, slamming the door behind him. "How dare you?" Ethan demanded, his voice shaking with fury. "You tried to destroy everything I've worked for, everything this company could become." Richard didn't flinch, his gaze cold. "This company isn't a playground for your idealism. I did what needed to be done." Ethan stepped closer, his voice low and filled with conviction. "No, you did what you always do, put greed above people. But not anymore. The board will side with me, and this foundation will thrive, with or without your approval." Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as Ethan turned and walked out. As Ethan left the office, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had fought for his family, for Olivia, for hope, and for a future he could be proud of. The battles weren't over, but he knew now he had the strength to face them, and the people he loved standing by his side. The hospital room was quiet now, save for the soft coos of baby Hope nestled in Olivia's arms. Ethan sat beside them, his gaze fixed on the two most important people in his life. Hope was tiny, her features delicate, but she carried a presence that felt larger than life. Every time she stirred, Ethan's heart swelled with emotions he couldn't put into words. "Hope," he whispered, brushing a finger gently over her small hand. "You're everything I never knew I needed." And he was the perfect medicine. Olivia looked at him, her face pale but glowing with quiet strength. "She's perfect," she said softly, her voice still laced with exhaustion but filled with wonder. "And you're the reason she's here, Ethan. You never gave up." Ethan reached for Olivia's hand, holding it tightly as a wave of gratitude washed over him. He had fought battles on all fronts, but this moment made it all worth it. The emptiness that had once consumed him now felt like a distant memory. Days later, Ethan found himself standing in his father's office once more, this time under very different circumstances. Richard sat behind his desk, the faint traces of defeat lingering in his expression. The board had backed Ethan's vision, and the foundation was moving forward. Yet Richard had called this meeting, and Ethan wasn't sure what to expect. "You've been busy," Richard said finally, his tone neutral but not unkind. "I've had a lot to fight for," Ethan replied, keeping his voice steady. Richard leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes studying his son. For a long moment, he said nothing, and the silence stretched between them. Finally, he sighed, the weight of years showing in his posture. "Oh," Richard sighed, almost lost patience with the situation. "You've shown me a better way, Ethan," Richard admitted, his voice softer than Ethan had ever heard it. "I was wrong to think strength only came from control. You've proven it comes from conviction, and from the people you surround yourself with. People who tell themselves in the morning that they have lived a deserving life. They prove you've done the same." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the admission. He had spent years seeking his father's approval, and now, unexpectedly, it was being offered. "I'm proud of you," Richard said, standing and extending a hand, "for the man you've become." Ethan accepted the handshake, a mixture of pride and relief coursing through him. Though their relationship was far from perfect, this moment felt like a step towards something better. As Ethan left the office, he couldn't help but think that his family's legacy had just been redefined. Months later, the Blackwell Taylor Foundation celebrated its grand opening in a sunny park near the Golden Loaf. A stage had been set up for speeches, and families from the community gathered, their laughter and chatter filling the air. The foundation's mission, to support struggling families and local businesses, was deeply personal to Ethan and Olivia. It was a promise to ensure others wouldn't face the struggles they had endured. Ethan stood on stage, Olivia by his side with baby Hope in her arms. As he gazed out at the crowd, he felt a wave of fulfillment unlike anything he'd ever known. "Thank you all for being here," Ethan began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This foundation isn't just about money or charity. It's about building a future where everyone has a chance to thrive. My wife, Olivia, taught me the value of dreams and the courage it takes to pursue them. This foundation is our way of giving back, to honor those dreams and help others turn them into reality." The crowd erupted into applause, but for Ethan, the real reward was seeing the smiles of those he had worked to help. As he stepped off the stage, Richard approached, a rare smile on his face. He reached out to hold his granddaughter, cradling her with an unexpected tenderness. "She's the future," Richard said quietly. "You're building something far greater than I ever could." Ethan placed a hand on his father's shoulder, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't thought possible. "We're building it together," he replied. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Ethan, Olivia, and Hope sat on a blanket beneath the stars. The city skyline sparkled in the distance, a reminder of where they had come from and how far they had journeyed. Ethan looked at Olivia, her head resting on his shoulder, and then at Hope, who slept peacefully in her arms. For the first time, the future felt clear, not just for him, but for the legacy they were creating as a family. The emptiness that had once plagued Ethan was gone, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. Together they had proven that life's broken pieces could be turned into something beautiful, a mosaic of love, resilience, and hope. As they sat beneath the vast sky, Ethan whispered softly, "This is our masterpiece." And in that moment, he knew they were exactly where they were meant to be.